and welcome back to the Minds of America. Today, I'll be your host, Kyle Nagy, and we will be running a panel on the idea of a mandatory political class in our, and possibly even all, school systems. The rules for the panel are fairly simple. We have 4 people here to discuss this topic. To our left, we have Liam Murray, and to our right, closest to me, we have Eric Applebaum. And to the far right, we have Dennis Tsapp. Before we begin, I'd like to remind the audience that we are all high schoolers, and our opinions are subject to change, but that doesn't mean that we should be seen as, we shouldn't be judged on our opinions. We're allowed to have opinions. That's part of what the First Amendment says, and that is really how it should be. You shouldn't be judging us based on our opinions. Anyway, let's get to the first question. I'm going to start over here, and we're going to move down with the opinions. Would a mandatory political class be beneficial, and why?
See, I feel my opinion on the mandatory political class and if it's beneficial is that I think politically is that where the focus should be. I feel it should be more so on civics and looking at the structure of the government and that each role each branch plays, each role that your legislature plays, and knowing about your local government.
I think that's all fair, but I also think that another reason a mandatory political class is beneficial, because I also believe that it is beneficial, is that, people, when they're graduating high school, are at the perfect age where they're about to be able to vote, and they're about to be able to participate in the political system. And with today's political climate of he said, she said, facts barely even matter in half the time, you need to be taught how to recognize facts at face value.
I believe that political class should be mandatory because in America we have a very high political apathy. I believe in the last midterm election, which was the highest since the 1910s, I believe. My math may be off, but the highest that we had since then was even below 50%. It would be beneficial because we'd actually have people caring about government if they know who's representing them and all this stuff, because right now I could ask 5 people in this high school who's the current senator from Jersey, and they would give me no one.
I believe that there should be classes in high schools about politics, how the government works, who your representatives are, where the Senate office is. I feel like that should be common knowledge. I don't, however, believe it should be mandatory. So that's all I have to say on that.
Anyone want to add anything to anything that anyone else said or anything like that? Okay, then I guess we'll move on to the second question. Why is it more beneficial to allow students to choose their own classes, giving them freedom to express? Why isn't it, or is it more beneficial to allow them to choose their own classes, giving them more freedom to express themselves and their own goals? We'll start with Liam again.
I feel that it is more beneficial to give them the freedom to choose those classes because certain people want to go down certain routes, and there's so many different avenues to go down that are so varied and so different that your classes should reflect that and should give you the necessary skills to be able to go into whatever trade or discipline you wish to pursue.
Yes, I agree with most of what you said, but I do think that this being a mandatory political class is very important due to the fact that it being mandatory makes sure that every young individual gets the information that they need to be a formidable adult. And yes, you should be able to express yourself and you should be able to choose your own classes, but there are certain things that you need to learn before you leave high school and become an adult. And in my opinion, politics and the basics of politics is a large part of that.
All right, and to piggyback off what you said, we have to take 3 years of math, 3 years of sciences, 3 years of history, and there is no class that teaches you politics or what the government sphere is unless you take a 4th year of history, which I don't think most people at this panel won't do just because I know you guys, but a lot of people in the high school, they'd rather have no years of math, no years of anything, and just take the easy courses. Having something mandatory means that everyone has to do it and allowing everyone to be taught and, as Kyle put it, a formidable adult.
Basically, to piggyback off what you guys were saying, in today's society, most 18-year-olds hit the ground running when they go into the voting poll for the first time. Like, they don't know who they're voting for, what they actually want, what their consequences of their choice is, what the consequence of not making a choice is. And therefore, I do believe that it would be beneficial. I do, however, believe that it is necessary for people to follow their dreams, because dreams are what motivate us as humans. Chemical reactions in our brain that keeps us going. So therefore, I believe it should be heavily encouraged, but not exactly mandatory.
Okay, that seems fair. But let's go over to Liam McClendon real quick before we go to the next question, because something you said between your first and second question kind of contradicted each other, because you said that you were heavily in favor of mandatory political class, but then in the next one, you said that you should focus more on classes that are geared to your profession in the future, which kind of contradict each other. Do you think that the political class should be mandatory or not?
I feel that more so civics class should be mandatory, and I do feel that it is important, because no matter what discipline you're going into, you're going to become an adult, and you don't want to jump in blind. So while I feel that there should be mandatory classes, such as, of course, civics, and like financial education, the main focus should be on your own discipline.
Okay. Let's go to the third question. Again, we're going to start over here. The next three will start over there. But for now, we'll start over here again. I'm going to ask the question, what, in your opinion, should be taught in a mandatory political class, and why?
So I feel like the most important thing is obviously your local government and who represents you. Your senators, your congressmen, obviously your president, vice president. That should be your main focus. You should be able to know who is, speaking for you on the public forum. And then you can start to go into more about like government structure and so on. But those should be the two main focuses. I really don't think that like current issues should be, should be what it should be geared towards.
Now, I'm kind of opposite from you, but with the same belief. I believe that more what it should be focusing on is the government itself and how the government is run before the actual people who represent you. Because the fact that the government will stay the same relatively, whereas the people representing you will change throughout your lifetime. And that is why I think that. But I also think, like you said, it should be focused more on, the government and less on each party's political beliefs. Although I think that should be touched upon, hopefully in an impartial way. That would be the goal. But, it should be definitely touched on so that people know what they're getting themselves into.
I would actually have to disagree with both of you, because what in a political class should teach you is what you should vote, what you would be voting for and stuff like that. It would more, in my opinion, it should be more geared to what each party does, who represents you and stuff like that, because otherwise you're still pretty much going in there blind. So if you know that, say, the Green Party of New Jersey is very much closer to what you want, that's what you should learn and vote for. But if you're just, I was told this guy's my representative, so I'm going to vote for him for the sole reason that he's my representative when I was in high school, that's not a valid reason, and I feel like that's what you should learn.
I honestly feel like what should be taught in a political class is what you're going to be reliant on when you're 18. Like, what source of... I'm not saying, like, what job gets what say in the government. I'm not saying that. I'm saying you're going to be reliant on your state representatives, your federal representatives, because they make up the laws that directly affect you, the average American citizen. So I feel like it's really a chess game, depending on how you look at it, because everything has a positive and negative reaction. So I feel like they should be taught how to monitor the consequences of their actions.
Okay, now did anyone hear anything that they would like to add upon or talk about?
Well, to address the topic of current issues and whether or not that should be addressed in class, I feel like, well, it's good that it should be touched upon, full on learning about it and learning about the parties. That's when you start introducing the impartiality into it, and then you start having the problem where the teacher can start putting their own input.
There's a way to get around that, and that would just be key sections of a party manifesto, reading such as you go to the Democrat website and reading, say, I don't know, their current manifesto, like one part of it, and explaining, and then going to the Republicans and doing the opposing views. That way, the only impartiality is the two parties' impartiality against each other.
That's a good point.
Any other problems with what anyone else said, or anyone want to talk about anything?
I just want to say, I feel like when kids get out of college, get out of high school, start voting, I feel like they're too quick to jump the gun on self-identifying as a Democrat or as a Republican or as a Green Party activist, who knows? I feel like they're too quick to jump the gun on that, and that should, like, they should be encouraged to have their own opinion, not follow the standards of the party that they think they belong to.
Yeah, I actually do agree with that because my political opinion is very crazy, but I am more closely aligned to one party than another, so that's who I follow. But I do agree you should follow whichever one you closest aligned to, but not follow everything they say. Like, I don't agree with everything the party I support does.
Okay, any other things that we want to touch upon with this question, or are we good?
I think that's it.
Okay, then for question 4 and onward, I'm going to be starting on that side. So I'll read the question. If there were to be a mandatory political class, should the curriculum be decided by the state or the federal government?
I feel like it should be decided by the federal government, only because this way you can't complain that certain kids from New Jersey are having a more liberal approach to politics, and then kids in California, very unrealistic by the way, have a more conservative approach to it. Like I said, very unrealistic, but it was the only thing I could think of. So
There's just one problem with the federal one, is that it will constantly going back and forth, which is because obviously every midterm and every 4 years we have a new president. Most of the time it's a new party. So what I would actually suggest is probably a balance of the two, of the state and federal, which would be states actually would somewhat set their own curriculum, but it must be within federally approved guidelines by a majority of the states, such as we all must learn this party's agenda, stuff like that. But the states would set which agenda they want to focus on in the party that they're forced to.
Okay, now my opinion on this is that education in general should be dealt with by the federal government, because states, when you have individual curriculums for individual states, there is a massive problem with how each state's culture, right? You know, like you said, some states are conservative, some states are liberal. Some states, you know, have high levels of the population who are religious and some don't. Different states have different cultures, and you can't have the states dictating education, because different people will have different educations that will lead them to different political beliefs, if that is the way it works. So obviously, in my opinion, the federal government should be regulating a mandatory political class.
I also agree with Eric that it should be a balance between the two, so that both can check the other, and that this will definitely allow for a lot more, remove the impartiality of it. And of course, it would help check a lot of the biases between both the federal and the state.
Okay, anyone want to add on to anyone else's argument, or are we good?
Okay.
I think we're good because we mostly have two sides that are agreeing.
Yeah. Okay, well then I'll go into question 5. Would a mandatory political class be strictly political, or would it be a part of a greater civics class that also includes financial information and other real-world knowledge?
I feel like it would have to include civics because it is a mandatory course, and I feel like if you're only gaining knowledge of politics out of it, well, honestly, you could just go to a 90-minute seminar and say you know exactly as much as a high school student. I feel like most of what you learn in a high school year could be crammed into 1 year if you try hard enough. So I feel like you should try to cram as much into it as possible.
Okay, Eric?
I would say you would probably need like GDP, stock market, stuff like that, stuff that's vital to politics to understand it. but not like how to make a check, how to buy a house, because if you do that, you're taking away from the political aspect and just making this another financial course. And you have to already take one here. So I would probably just do like GDP, stock market, like the Dow Jones, all that stuff that is like economy-wise, shove that into a political course, maybe include taxes, stuff like that, anything that you need for politics, put that in there. It won't be a strictly political course. Of course, you can't have anything strictly political, but it's close.
Now, moving on to my opinion on this issue, I think that we need multiple mandatory classes to deal with the idea of civics. Civics is a very wide-range subject, and almost everything that would be classified into a civics class needs to be addressed, in my opinion, in a more lengthy manner. So, we should have a mandatory political class. We should have a mandatory financial class. But I think grouping these things together into one class causes a problem of not having enough time to learn everything that there is to learn that you should know before becoming an adult.
Yeah, I sort of agree that while a lot of what we learn for civics is sort of devolved into history, such as, a lot of government structure we learn in history, but I feel like that by giving it its own class and giving civics its own class, which I believe the focus should be more civics than political, when you do that, you're allowing it to take the focus and allowing it to be more dominant over, whereas in history class, you're more so learning that, of course, history, but make civics dominant, make the structure dominant, make sure what you need to know going into adulthood, make that dominant.
Okay, anyone want to talk about what anyone else said, or are we good on that one as well?
I'd just like to say you made a very well argument. That's all I got to say.
Okay, well then we'll move on to our final question, actually. And we'll start over there again, but I'll say the question like usual. How would you stop teachers from enforcing their belief upon the youth of America if this class were to come to fruition?
Well, teachers in colleges and high schools already do that. I remember a while back, older friend of mine, wrote a paper that she was forced to do on a social justice, and her teacher failed her for it because she did not agree with her views. And it was a very well-written paper, very well written. So it's already happening now. I'd say what you can do is make sure you don't hire an activist or hire someone who is left-leaning, right-leaning. I'd say just get someone who's very by the book and therefore go by that.
I would probably just say you can't stop people from enforcing their beliefs, but if they try and enforce it with the case like you, that would actually be discrimination because you cannot discriminate based off of political opinion. So if they do even slightly do it, I would suggest you just fire them outright, because if they're biased in such a way that it's failing people, like your friend, they're not a teacher, they're an activist trying to enforce their rule. That's not what this class should be. So I would just say, you can't really stop it, so just let it happen. And if it does happen, sack the teacher.
Okay, now moving on to my opinion on this issue. I think that what Dennis said was actually brilliant, right? You find someone who teaches by the books. If you teach by the books, and the books are well regulated by the federal government, as I mentioned, you won't have a problem of teachers being even able to enforce their beliefs upon smaller people in America, due to the fact that they just won't have the ability to. It'll be part of the curriculum, and they'll have to teach by the book to the curriculum. Moving on to you now.
I kind of side more with Eric here, that it's really not so more so that you don't want to put it on the teachers, but that you hold them accountable for it, and that there should be a sort of like conduct that is expected and accountability that is put into it. And that, so if there is certain discrimination, the teachers should obviously, of course, be held accountable to that, and that can sort of be enforced, and to sort of, almost as in, if the class is made mandatory, you can almost make those sort of expectations and that conduct be enforced as well.
Okay, that all seems fair from everyone. Does anyone have anything to say about anyone else's argument? Because if not, then I actually would like to comment on both Eric and what Liam said. I think that holding teachers accountable is kind of a false solution, right? It gives you a solution maybe at the end, but that doesn't change what happens during the class. It doesn't stop the teacher from, affecting these impressionable youth. It doesn't stop the teachers from doing these things if they really want to.
So you want to force people to have absolutely no bias, which is very nearly impossible to do, I believe. I think the only cases where that even happens is maybe in 1% of all cases that you can literally get rid of your biases. I know one teacher in McAuliffe Middle School who refused to tell us who she voted for, anything like that. And that's a way to do it, but it's very hard because for a mandatory political class, there's always going to be bias, but once it gets so bad, that's when it's firing. But if it's a normal bias, you can't get rid of your normal bias. It's nearly impossible to.
Okay, that seems like a fair way to say it. I just think that this isn't about getting rid of your biases. This is about not bringing them up at all. You're reading a textbook that is teaching the people about, civics and political stuff.
And
wait, can I please?
I just want to point out one flaw. The textbook could have a bias. Everything has a bias.
Of course, but the idea is that these textbooks are written by groups of people with multiple ideas, and you make them as unbiased as possible. Everything's going to have some sort of bias, but if everyone's working together to write the textbooks and make sure the curriculum is as non-biased as possible, I feel like that can be achieved. And as long as the teachers are taught to not deviate from the curriculum, it won't be a serious problem.
So you just want the teachers to teach by the books and not go over, say a new major party comes out. They're not allowed to touch on that new major party for 4 years maybe while there's a new textbook in the making. That would be an illogical solution to a problem that could just be easily solved if they're given the range to say, oh, by the way, here's this new party, let's go check out its manifesto.
Yeah, may I just comment on that real
Yes.
quick? No one's saying they have to only read from the book and that's it. There's no this, that, or the other. I feel like they should be allowed to, if they can, non-biasedly elaborate on any new developments in the political world. Say that there is an upbringing of a new major party or something. Because in that case, that would be very important and that would change the culture of the country. So yes, that would need to be touched up on. However, I do not believe that they would need to touch up on much because while a lot happens in our world, not that much happens that would significantly affect the entire country.
Can I just add on to what Dennis said and kind of go against what you said a little bit here? Because you said, let's just take the example of a new political party, becoming very large. That kind of change doesn't happen in that short of a period of time. It would be slowly integrated into, one of the minor parties that would be taught, and then slowly as it grew larger and larger, it would be integrated into a more major party.
I'm just going to use a real-world example. The recent Israeli elections, the Blue and White Party, which was a recent party center-left created by an Israeli general, just won 33 seats, which tied for first with the current sitting prime minister's party. So it can happen. A major party can just appear like that if something changes. If, say, the Democrats collapse, there's going to be a new party. If both parties collapse, new major party. It all depends on the circumstances. The one in Israel, of course, is spawned by corruption scandals and all this, which is why that party was formed. I'm just using that as an example to show a party that never existed before the election has tied for first place.
Yeah, okay. I see where you're coming from with that, but I think that's more the exception than the rule. I think that generally political shifts and growth in political parties are more gradual and less extreme. I mean, there are examples even in U.S. history where a political party just kind of falls out of favor within an election or two. But the idea would be that you would try to keep the curriculum up to date alongside these political parties changing. They wouldn't be biased by the people who wrote them because they're written by groups of people. you wouldn't really have to worry about this new party getting thrown out. But I think we're kind of going a little bit far from the actual question. But I think that, it's worth talking about.
Yeah.
Anyone else want to say anything? Okay, then. I think that's all we have for today. My name is Kyle Nagy, here with Dennis Tsapp, Eric Applebaum, and Liam Murray. And we are from Minds of America. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And that's all I got to say about that.